The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time released at a pivotal point in the realm of 3D games, at a time when players were still getting accustomed to the expansive level designs that this new era of gaming had to offer. This ambitious leap forward meant there were bound to be growing pains, and one of the clearest examples is with OOT's Water Temple. The dungeon structure was so confusing that it had many players convinced you could get permanently stuck if you used your keys in the wrong order. Of course, this rumor has been debunked many times over the years, but what if we were to try and intentionally get stuck? With countless advanced strategies and glitches discovered in the 27 years since Ocarina of Time released, it may just be possible to get stuck in the Water Temple for good. In the early days of the internet, gaming rumors had an interesting level of notoriety. Without video sharing sites like YouTube, most online resources about games were based in forums and text-based walkthroughs, so the standards for providing evidence were much lower. This is how infamous rumors were born, such as unlocking Toad in Super Smash Bros. Melee, finding Mew under the truck in Pokemon, unlocking Sonic and Tails in Super Smash Bros. You get the idea. These types of rumors had a special kind of staying power, partly because there wasn't a concrete way to debunk them, and the concept of a super secret unlockable that nobody had found yet was just too good to be true, giving a prime opportunity for some of the more outlandish claims to spread like wildfire. But the rumor about getting stuck in the Water Temple is somewhat unique in that, rather than being based upon a blatant lie that someone put on the internet, this is one based in shared player experience. The overwhelming design of the dungeon created a mutual frustration that caused more than a few players to believe that there was a way to permanently lock yourself out of progressing through the dungeon. Part of the problem had to do with the fact that the Water Temple was fairly ambitious for an early era 3D game. It may not look so difficult to someone trying to play the dungeon today, but at the time, this dungeon expected a level of comprehension that many players just weren't accustomed to yet. Looking at the layout of the dungeon, the Water Temple differed greatly from the dungeons seen up to this point in the game. Prior to the Water Temple, Ocarina of Time's dungeons followed a relatively linear design so as to not overwhelm the player in their travel through these areas. The Water Temple, on the other hand, completely broke away from this pattern. Right from the get-go, the dungeon presents the player with multiple pathways and several key-locked doors that appear to be accessible through a variety of different methods. The main mechanic of adjusting the water level and using the iron boots to navigate through the corridors may be seen as needlessly time-consuming, and can absolutely lead to missed passageways and keys that are only accessible when the water is at a certain height. The dungeon's map doesn't do it a great service either. I played this dungeon hundreds of times, and even I still need some time to parse this thing. Before we get too deep in the details of the Water Temple's layout, let me take a moment to talk about a basic principle behind Zelda's dungeon design. Now, I'm not an expert in game design, but I do have some background in quality assurance and user error. One fundamental truth I've been reminded of time and time again is that you can never expect a user to play by your rules. If there's a way to break it, players are bound to find it. This is essential when you're trying to create a certain level of progression through a dungeon. You have to be extremely careful about where you place keys and their intended doors. If there's even a small chance a player could use keys in a different order than what's intended, you better make sure there's a fallback route so they don't get stuck. This is a concept that some players, especially those in randomizer communities, refer to as key logic, which essentially posits that even if you use your keys in the absolute worst, most illogical way, there still should be a path to completing the dungeon without getting yourself stuck. Key logic is something that, perhaps implicitly, Nintendo had to pay attention to when designing the dungeons in this game. As a very simple example, let's take a look at the bottom of the well. The key layout in this dungeon is fairly simple. There are 3 key-locked doors that each lead to a gold Skulltula, meaning each door is required for a 100% playthrough of the game. What's important to note is that all 3 keys and all 3 doors are accessible from the beginning of the dungeon. You don't have to use a key in order to access more keys, and none of the doors are explicitly locked by another. If, for example, one of the keys was present behind one of these locked doors, you could potentially end up in a situation where using your keys in the wrong order would indeed lock you out of the last key necessary to complete the gold Skulltula hunt. And this is where the Water Temple differs greatly from the dungeons that came before it. Assuming you played the Forest and Fire Temples first, those dungeons contain a key door progression laid out extremely linearly, and it's very hard to branch out from that intended path. The Water Temple, on the other hand, offers a decent level of variation that players can employ when navigating the many paths through the dungeon. So, just how rigid is the key logic of the Water Temple? Let's start by examining what appears to be the intended path through the dungeon. We're going to start simple here to lay the groundwork, so don't fret that I'm omitting certain maneuvers to do things out of order. We'll get to that later. Although there are many paths that appear to be options at the beginning of the dungeon, you'll eventually be funneled into the lower east side pathway, which leads you to a brief reunion with Princess Ruto. As you rise to the surface, you'll be presented with the main gimmick behind the dungeon, adjusting the water level in the dungeon by playing Zelda's Lullaby at certain wall panels throughout the dungeon. The first panel, located at the top east corridor, lowers the water level to the bottom, providing new opportunities for exploration. Immediately upon dropping down, you can light 2 torches to access a short fight and obtain the first small key. Moving back to the central area, the west side pathway is now accessible and will lead you to the dungeon's second small key. Take note of the fact that 2 small keys are accessible to the player without opening a single locked door. At this point, if you return to the central area, you must now go through the central pillar key door on the first floor, as it's the only one readily accessible with the water level at its lowest. We'll call this key door 1, and we'll continue to number the key doors in order as we go through the intended path, just for simplicity. After unlocking the first door, you'll reach a second panel, which raises the water level to level 2, which in turn gives you access to a third key within the depths of this room. An additional key is accessible at this stage in the Water Temple, as going back through the lower eastern pathway now allows you to reach the chest behind the cracked wall, meaning we've found 4 keys in total. To recap, we were able to get 2 keys after lowering the water level to 1, and by using one of them, we raised the water level to 2 and gained access to 2 additional keys, meaning our net total is now 3. From here, the path forward has us use a key on the second level west side door. We'll call this key door 2, and this leads us to the final water level panel, returning the water level to 3. With the water once again at its highest point, and 2 keys remaining in our inventory, we can now access a sequence of 2 doors on the upper west side, which we'll call key doors 3 and 4. Beyond these doors lies a fight with Dark Link, who guards the Longshot. After clearing the Song of Time block behind the Longshot chest, we enter the lower river room and gain a 5th small key behind a locked gate. Stocked with the Longshot, we can return to the main area of the Water Temple, where one final key must be obtained. By setting the water level back to 2, the south side presents an eye switch puzzle that requires the Longshot to obtain the 6th and final small key. From here, the lower north pathway has 2 final sequential key doors, 5 and 6, leading to the boss key, which allows us to complete the dungeon. With all this taken into account, let's chart out and examine the lay of the land as it stands in the Water Temple. To start, recall that, when we entered the dungeon, 2 keys were accessible without unlocking a single door, and 2 additional keys were accessible by entering the central pillar and setting the water level to 2. At first glance, the key logic in Water Temple seems fairly solid. 4 keys are accessible fairly easily, and exactly 4 key doors are presented on the path to the Longshot. The last 2 keys and their intended key doors are all locked by the Longshot, so it doesn't seem like there's a lot we can do. But surely there are a few tricks that we can do to go out of order here. I'm sure many of you have been screaming at me in the last few minutes over the fact that you can actually access the inside of the central pillar through the back door on the second level without using a key on key door 1. By returning to the start of the dungeon through one of various methods, you can easily jump down to the second level and light this torch with the bow. This gives you access to setting the water level to 2 without wasting a key, which is great for our goal of doing things out of order, but remember that this also gives us access to 2 additional keys in the central pillar and behind the cracked wall, so it's actually to our detriment to skip this key door. Additionally, using a precise setup, we can access the cracked wall small key from the top level without having to set the water level to 2. A third technique we can do to circumvent the intended order of the dungeon is accessing the level 3 water panel with a precise ledge grab, but this only serves to skip key door 2. No matter how we approach it, the 4 keys at the start of the dungeon are easily accessible and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. With the 4 key doors present on the path to the Longshot, and the Longshot locking the final 2 key doors, we're gonna have to think outside the box here. Box. That might just work. You may have noticed so far, I've been sticking to a fairly glitchless approach to the water temple. Indeed, all of the strategies I've discussed so far are allowed within the glitchless rule set, so as long as we're holding ourselves to that rule set, we can do plenty of techniques that are unintended but still allowed to our advantage. For example, the glitchless rule set permits using bombs to damage boost yourself onto normally out of reach places, which is incredibly useful for sequence breaks throughout the game. While it's not exactly useful in the water temple, there's an incredibly precise strategy that allows glitchless runners to damage boost up to this box ledge in the graveyard, and then on top of the cliffs that encompass the area. With a precise walk across this cliff, you can gain access to the Shadow Temple without having access to the Nocturne of Shadow, which is of course locked behind completing the water temple in the first place. Doing this sequence break will give you access to the hover boots early, and those are the key to locking ourselves out of completing the dungeon. Despite what I said earlier about the last 2 key doors being locked behind the long shot, that's only true if you assume the player doesn't have the hover boots. With the hover boots, you can do a backwalk and backflip to get over these spikes and gain access to the boss key early. While this might not appear to achieve much at first, think about what we've just done. Access to the boss key is great, but without the long shot, you aren't able to access the boss door to use the key in the first place. So with the hover boots in play, we gain access to 2 additional key doors to unlock out of order, but will this be enough? We do have to acknowledge that with the hover boots, we're also able to access a 5th key behind the eye switch puzzle. This much you can do in a few other glitchless ways anyway, but regardless, let's take a look at what position we're in. Using everything we've talked about so far, the 5 keys we have can be used on key doors 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, leaving us with 0 small keys, and the ever important key door 4, locking the long shot, is now permanently blocking the way. The only small key left is beyond the long shot chest, and we don't have a way to get that chest in any other way within the glitchless rule set. Congratulations! You have officially gotten yourself permanently stuck in the water temple. After all this time, I guess those kids on the playground with uncles at Nintendo were telling the truth after all. Now you can finally feel vindicated that the rumors were true, leaving your copy of Ocarina of Time in a permanent state of being unable to progress to the end of the dungeon. At which point you'll probably learn how to side flip hover, and then getting that last small key becomes no problem at all. Yeah, there's a reason I was leaving glitches off the table till now. As soon as you allow glitches, you allow for all sorts of sequence breaks that completely reframe this challenge. If you can clip out of bounds, you can get to the long shot chest without using a single small key. Hell, don't even bother with the long shot. You can just do a super slide hover to get across the gap, do a staircase hover to skip past the boss door, and be done with the water temple in under a minute. With Ocarina of Time's diverse catalog of glitches, it definitely breaks the water temple wide open in a way that getting stuck is nearly impossible. But maybe there's something else we can do. One suggestion would be to use stale reference manipulation and potentially even arbitrary code execution to really mess things up. SRM and Ace are extremely potent glitches in Ocarina of Time that allow you to do basically anything you want, but they stand as incredibly controversial glitches in the OOT community, as they trivialize a lot of the challenge behind what one can accomplish in the game. In this case, you could use these glitches to delete all your keys, or replace the long shot with an ice trap. You could even give Morpha infinite health, or make the game crash upon entering the water temple. But why stop there? Use Ace to make the water temple inaccessible, or make Link unable to move, or... The point is, with these glitches on the table, everything becomes possible. And with no upper bound, it makes these sort of challenges much less interesting. As it turns out, most speedrun categories for OOT will ban these 2 glitches, simply because it trivializes the challenge and thought process that goes into a well thought out speedrun category, and I'd argue that it holds a similar standing here. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to rule out SRM and Ace as an approach here. But I think we can get a little more creative. You see, there's another glitch in Ocarina of Time that's been known for a long time, and while powerful, still requires some careful thought and planning in order to be useful, and I think we can make good use of it here. RBA, Reverse Bottle Adventure, is one of the most iconic glitches in the history of Ocarina of Time. Explaining the glitch in full would take far too long for a video like this, so if you're really interested in learning about it in full, I suggest you check out one of these videos that do a great job breaking down everything the glitch has to offer. Trying to sum it up in one sentence is difficult, but I'll try my best. By first doing a glitch to get a bottle on your B button, and then altering the contents of that bottle, you will change something in your inventory, depending on what item is on your C right slot. As far as OOT lingo goes, we tend to use RBA as a verb, such as if I put a bottle on my B button with a PO bottle on C right, what I've done there is referred to as RBAing the PO bottle, and this has the specific effect of altering the number of bomb chews in the inventory. There's a lot of nuance to this glitch and way too many possibilities to sum up here, but unlike Ace, it does have bounds on what you can and can't achieve. After all, it's limited to what we can equip to the C buttons, so I think it's worth talking about in the context of the water temple. Now, I'm willing to bet some OOT speedrunners might be thinking about the incredibly entertaining 37 water temple keys speedrun, where the point of the run is to use RBA to, well, give yourself 37 water temple keys. However, as you might imagine, more water temple keys is not really helpful here. But our approach with RBA doesn't end here. There's so many different parts of the inventory that can be modified with RBA that there's plenty of potential to get ourselves stuck in the water temple. In fact, I can think of 3 approaches with RBA that may just offer what we're looking for, so let's examine each of them. My first idea is to delete the water medallion entirely from your inventory. If we consider the medallion proof of beating the dungeon, then deleting it from our inventory might just be a valid approach. Altering medallions is possible by performing RBA with the Broken Goron sword from the adult trade quest on C right, and you can indeed use this method to delete the water medallion, among a few other effects, by catching either a fairy or fish on the B bottle. However, you can just as easily get the medallion back by catching something else on this B bottle, as long as you still have Broken Goron sword on C right. You might think that you can prevent this by continuing the trade quest and losing the ability to RBA Broken Goron sword, but if you can believe it, OOT possesses a glitch that can even circumvent this. You might be intrigued over the fact that RBA is called Reverse Bottle Adventure. If it's the reverse, then what about regular Bottle Adventure? While it's a bit different, it turns out that Bottle Adventure, or BA, presents a bit of a snag with our overall goal here. Bottle Adventure is another glitch that's very difficult to explain in anything less than 5 paragraphs, but I'll try to simplify. By traveling from adult to child with a bottle on B, and then traveling back to adult, the item you have on your C right button as a child will modify what item is on your B button when you return to adult. The possibilities for BA cover a ton of scenarios where you'd otherwise lock yourself out of certain items. In this case, if we go back in time with an empty bottle on B, and return to adult with a PO bottle on C right, and we have specifically 50 bomb chews in our inventory, we'll end up with the poacher's saw on our B button as an adult. This functions just like the real poacher's saw, and can be traded to the carpenter in Gerudo Valley. This, in effect, returns our actual adult trade item slot to the Broken Goron sword, so there's no possible way to permanently prevent ourselves from getting the water medallion back. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. We're talking about deleting the water medallion, but in order for that to work out, we'd have to first obtain the medallion legitimately. That requires, well, beating the water temple, and at that point, that kind of defeats the whole notion of getting stuck, doesn't it? So this first approach isn't going to work out anyway. My second approach involves a set of items which RBA causes to modify major dungeon items, specifically the map, compass, and boss key in each dungeon. As it turns out, having ice arrows on C right will cause a B bottle to affect these items in the water temple, and importantly, allows us to delete the boss key. So, by first obtaining the boss key legitimately, and then RBAing either a fairy, blue fire, or simply emptying the bottle on B, the water boss key will no longer be in our possession. Like before, we can still get this back as long as we have the ice arrows, but let's instead RBA with hookshot on C right. Doing so will replace the ice arrows in our inventory with a bottle, and at this point we can no longer equip ice arrows on a C button. This makes the water boss key completely unobtainable, and there's no methods of getting it back, not with Bottle Adventure or anything else. I guess that was pretty easy, right? Surely there's no way to beat the water temple anymore, right? Yeah, not even close. We've already seen that skipping the water boss key is easily doable with bomb hovering, and if you know how to do RBA, chances are you know how to do this boss key skip too. We're gonna have to do a little better than that. Both RBA and BA provide way too many edge cases that can circumvent any attempt to get truly locked out of beating the water temple, but what if we could prevent these glitches from even being useful in the first place? Let's start with Bottle Adventure. As I've stated before, it's a very useful glitch for acquiring a wide variety of items, even if they've somehow been removed or replaced in our inventory. But the only way to perform it is to travel back in time from adult to child, and then back to adult. Obviously, if you played OOT, you know that that's not a very difficult thing to achieve, but there is one major roadblock. You see, Sheik blocks us from going back in time until we've beaten the Forest Temple, and much to the frustration of speedrunners over the years, the game checks specifically that you've entered the Blue Warp after killing Phantom Ganon, rather than the presence of the Forest Medallion in your inventory. So there's no way of getting around this by, say, glitching the Forest Medallion into your inventory. But how are we going to render the Forest Temple unbeatable? As long as RBA is usable, we're going to run into the exact same problems as Water Temple, so that brings me to my third and final idea. RBA is powerful, but its potential is only limited by the items that we're able to equip on the C buttons. If we were somehow able to replace all the items in our inventory with something useless, we not only nerf the utility of RBA, but we also put the game in a state where progressing is impossible. No hookshot, no explosives, essentially anything that can help us traverse the game would be gone. And how can this be done? It turns out that we can achieve this with, you guessed it, RBA. Just a few minutes ago, I talked about how you can replace the ice arrow slot in your inventory with a bottle by RBAing hookshot on C right. But it doesn't stop there. If we play our cards right, we can transform every useful item in our inventory into nothing more than bottles. Let's start by acquiring the majority of the equipable items from their legitimate sources. How we get to the items is going to involve some glitches, but it's important that we get these items from their intended sources so that we can't reacquire them later. For example, once we open the Lens of Truth chest and get the Lens of Truth, even if we then replace the lens with something else, the game isn't going to detect this and unopen that chest. It's gone forever. So with that, we'll start our file, and before becoming adult, we'll acquire sticks, nuts, slingshot, fairy ocarina, bomb chews, Lens of Truth, Zelda's letter, bomb bag, beans, Din's fire, and the 3 bottles that are accessible as child. Once we skip the door of time to go adult, we'll acquire the hookshot, Megaton hammer, ice arrows, Ferore's wind, Nehru's love, the 4th bottle, which is easiest to get if we do a glitch called Equip Swap, which happens to put a bottle on the Din slot, but this is okay. And finally, we'll complete the adult trade quest up to Broken Goron Sword. I didn't just bring this item up earlier to talk about deleting the water medallion. Its ability to modify medallions with RBA is going to be useful here. While the implication is that you need all 6 medallions before you can get the light arrows, in actuality, the game only checks for the presence of Shadow and Spirit medallions. The game's code just assumes that you'd have the rest of the medallions before being able to get the last 2. But by catching a fairy with a bottle on B, with Broken Goron Sword on C right, RBA sets our medallions to exactly that, just the Shadow and Spirit medallions. With this done, we enter the Temple of Time and trigger the light arrow cutscene, and acquire the light arrows into our inventory as well. We'll also need to get a green and blue potion into one of our bottles each, and we'll bring a fish along to facilitate the RBA process. Okay, we're almost ready to execute this plan, but you may notice a few items missing from the inventory still. We're intentionally avoiding the bow, since having a quiver in our inventory is going to present some potential avenues that could get ourselves unstuck. So to avoid that scenario, we're just going to avoid the quiver altogether. We also avoid fire arrows and boomerang here, since replacing these item slots with bottles is a little bit more complicated, but once we complete our ultimate bottle adventure, neither of these items will be obtainable anyway, so we don't have to worry about them. Before we begin though, there's just one last bit of setup we need to do. Of all places, we need to enter the Water Temple. The first step here is to get the Water Temple boss key. Not because we need it, but because we want to delete it as part of this process, just so we prevent ourselves from ever acquiring it again. So we'll grab 2 keys, skip over to the boss key chest, grab 2 more keys, and then we'll head over to the long shot chest, which at this point I sincerely hope you all know how to do. In the long shot room, we're finally ready to execute this plan. First, get a bottle with our fish on B. This is easy enough to do with a simple bomb setup. Then, we'll start the RBA process by emptying our B bottle with ice arrows on C right. You may recall that this deletes the boss key. Now, the real inventory destruction begins. We'll repeatedly drop and catch the fish in this bottle on B with different items on C right. And while it's not strictly necessary, just for fun, I'm going to both drop and catch the fish for each item, as this will cause each slot to have a copy of the fish on it. So, we begin our sequence of RBA with the following items on C right in order: hookshot, hammer, beans, lens, Ferore's wind, sticks, nuts, bombs, slingshot, green potion, and finally, blue potion. At this point, our inventory will look like this. We're almost there, but there's still a few items here that we need to get rid of. And that brings us to the reason why we entered the water temple in the first place. We needed to RBA hookshot to replace the ice arrow slot, but we also need to replace the Ferore's wind slot, which requires a long shot instead on C right. Since we already RBA'd the hookshot, we can now open the long shot chest, which replaces the hookshot in our inventory, put the long shot on C right, drop and catch our fish once more, and Ferore's wind is also rendered a bottle. Next, we'll do the same with bomb shoes on C right, which will replace the long shot. And finally, RBA Ocarina on C right, which overwrites the Ocarina itself. We're almost done, but we still need to overwrite our bomb shoe slot. So by expending any remaining bomb shoes in our inventory, bringing the number of bomb shoes to 0, we can perform a glitch called bottle dupe, which will replace the last useful item slot in our inventory. And as a final step, we'll save and reset with the bottle still on B, so that when reloading our file, we've deleted none other than the Master Sword itself. At this point, we've finally reached a point where our inventory is effectively useless. The only item slot other than fish bottles belongs to the magic beans, which aren't going to get us very far, as none of the soil patches you can plant them in exist in the adult world. The only items we can get back into our inventory are sticks and nuts, which don't really accomplish much either. Acquiring the fire arrows requires a bow, and getting into Jabu to find the boomerang is going to require explosives, and we don't have either of those now. And even if we could do RBA at this point, all it would be good for is continuing to replace other item slots with more bottles. And as discussed before, Bottle Adventure can't bail us out, because we don't even have a way to get into the Forest Temple now. Not with a hookshot, not with a bomb hover, nor anything else. Without a way forward, Link tragically cannot continue his quest to save Hyrule. But, perhaps most importantly, this infamous gaming rumor has once and for all been proven true. Without any way to get into the dungeon's boss room, we have finally gotten ourselves permanently stuck in the Water Temple.